Dear ladies and gentlemen, today I will take you back to a little known corner of European history, a place where marriage was not the result of love, but a sharp instrument of power. The story is titled The Six-Year-Old Bride and the Political Chess Game, the tragic life of a forgotten Queen of England. In 1396, England and France were mired in decades of deep-seated hatred. To secure peace, one of the most unusual weddings in England's history took place. The groom, King Richard II, aged 29. The bride, Princess Isabella of France, barely 6 years old. This was neither a fairy tale nor a romantic love story. It was a cold, calculated political move designed to determine the fate of both kingdoms. Part 1. A bloody political landscape. The Hundred Years' War between England and France had entered its 60-plus years of bloodshed. Both nations were exhausted by the conflict. Farmlands lay in ruin, cities lay in rubble, treasuries were empty, and the people's spirit was fractured. Blood and tears had become the common language spoken on both shores of the English Channel. In this grim context, royal courts did not rely solely on the sword to decide victory or defeat. They also wielded a softer, yet equally calculating weapon: royal marriage. These unions were not the result of affection, but a formidable tool of diplomacy, powerful enough to tip the balance of power and reshape the course of war. For kings, each royal marriage was like a chessboard of power. A bride or groom was not merely a life partner, but also a political hostage, a living symbol of a treaty, and at times, a pretext to ignite a new war. In this ruthless game, love was often a luxury, while power remained the ultimate goal. It was in this suffocating atmosphere that King Richard II of England made a decision history would never forget: to enter into a highly controversial marriage with a bride just 6 years old, Princess Isabella of France. Behind this seemingly fragile and innocent wedding lay a cold political chess match, where every move could determine the fate of both kingdoms. Part 2. A Childhood in a Mad Palace. Isabella was born in Paris in 1389, at a time when France was engulfed in ongoing political crises and instability. She was the daughter of King Charles VI, a monarch remembered not for his skill in governance, but for his unpredictable bouts of madness. During his episodes, Charles VI believed his body was made of glass, terrified it might shatter if anyone touched him. He often neglected state affairs, behaved erratically, and became a puppet in the hands of rival factions in Paris. Isabella's mother, Queen Isabeau of Bavaria, was an ambitious and shrewd woman. She made no secret of her intention to use her children as bargaining chips in political negotiations to strengthen her own power. To Isabeau, Isabella was not merely a beloved daughter, but a strategic piece on the chessboard, one that could be exchanged for influence and advantage on a national scale. Isabella's childhood was far from the serene life suggested by the splendor of the French royal court. Behind the solid stone walls and gilded halls lay an oppressive atmosphere of intrigue, relentless struggles for power, and the instability brought about by the king's illness. She grew up surrounded by the whispers of advisors, tense closed-door meetings, and calculating glances that constantly measured her political value. For Isabella, childhood was never a carefree time. From an early age, she was swept into the whirlwind of a political chess game, where every move and every word she spoke could become part of someone else's plan. And then, barely having learned to read and write, Isabella's fate was sealed. She would leave her homeland to become the queen of a foreign land. Part 3. The Shocking Marriage Plan. In 1394, Queen Anne of Bohemia, the deeply beloved wife of King Richard II, died of the plague. Her death not only left a void in the king's heart, but also triggered a severe political crisis. Richard II had no heir. In a court already rife with intrigue and instability, the lack of a successor to the throne became a spark threatening the very stability of the kingdom. In this situation, Richard II was forced to seek a new alliance to strengthen his position. The opportunity arose as the Hundred Years' War between England and France, a long and brutal conflict, had left both nations exhausted. France wanted peace to stabilize its own court, while England needed an agreement to ease the pressure on the battlefield. And the form of this peace handshake would be a royal marriage. The chosen bride was Princess Isabella, the 6-year-old daughter of King Charles VI of France. Though far too young to be a true wife, Isabella was, politically, the perfect gift, a living symbol of the peace treaty and a guarantee that the two nations would be unlikely to resume war for at least a decade. The decision sent shockwaves across Europe. Many mocked Richard II for marrying a child, claiming he was turning marriage into a farce. Yet in the eyes of diplomats and advisors, this was a shrewd move. Instead of spilling more blood on the battlefield, England and France could sign a truce lasting 28 years. However, beneath the praise for this strategy, whispers of doubt remained. Could a political marriage to a 6-year-old truly bring lasting peace? Or was it merely a fragile facade, concealing the power ambitions and deep-seated distrust that had never truly disappeared between the two kingdoms? Part 4. The Strange Wedding. The wedding day was set, and Westminster Abbey, the religious and political heart of England, became the stage for one of the most unusual ceremonies in royal history. The guest list included the most powerful nobles, foreign ambassadors, and hundreds of commoners gathered outside the church, eager to see how the 6-year-old bride would appear. As the church music began to play, Princess Isabella emerged in a lavish wedding gown adorned with gold and precious jewels. The dress, so extravagant that it became a symbol of wealth and power, was also a literal burden for her small frame. Its long, heavy train forced attendants to guide her step by step, making her look more like an ornamental figure being carefully carried to the altar. Beside her stood King Richard II, tall and imposing in his royal attire. The age gap between them, 29 and 6, was not only the difference of a generation, but a clear testament that this was not a marriage of love. Nearly everyone present understood that this ceremony carried far more political meaning than personal sentiment. After the vows and religious rites, the two were officially declared husband and wife. However, the marriage was not consummated, as Isabella was far too young. Instead, she would be brought to the English court to live as a princess and the future queen, until she was old enough to truly become the king's wife. Supporters saw this as a fragile symbol of peace between the two nations. But skeptics smiled bitterly. A wedding without love, a bride too young to even grasp the concept of marriage, and an alliance built on cold calculation. All signs that this political chess game was only just beginning. Part 5. Childhood Days in England. After the wedding, Isabella left France behind and stepped into a world entirely different from the one she had known. Westminster Palace, the beating heart of English power. Though only 6 years old, she now bore the title of Queen of England and was treated with the utmost formality. Each morning, Isabella awoke in a vast chamber flooded with sunlight. But instead of spending her days in carefree play like other children her age, she began her mornings with lessons and strict courtly routines. Her caretakers, a mix of noble ladies, governesses, and trusted attendants appointed by the king, were tasked not only with ensuring her safety, but also with shaping her into the future queen. She learned English, a language that at first felt alien and strange, its harsh consonants and unfamiliar rhythms making her long for the soft sounds of French. But over time, it became a bridge, enabling her to speak with courtiers, understand the chatter of servants, and grasp the meaning behind the endless ceremonies she was required to attend. Isabella's days followed a precise rhythm. She learned to bow gracefully, to take measured steps in heavy gowns, to speak with dignity at banquets, and, most importantly, to absorb the unspoken rules of royal etiquette. Alongside these lessons, she began her introduction to the world of politics, though filtered through stories and carefully chosen words suitable for a child. She would sit quietly at the edge of grand halls during court gatherings, listening to the voices of noblemen debating taxes, land rights, and military campaigns. It did not take long for Isabella to realize that power in England did not rest solely with the king. It was a delicate and dangerous web, woven between the monarchy, the nobility, the church, and shadowy forces whose influence was felt but rarely named aloud. Everyone, it seemed, was playing their own game, and each was searching for a way to tip the balance in their favor. As the years passed, Isabella grew increasingly perceptive. She learned to read a person's intentions in the flicker of an expression, the pause before a reply, or the emphasis placed on a certain word. She began to distinguish genuine praise from empty flattery, and harmless chatter from remarks heavy with political undertones. Though still a child, Isabella came to understand that she was not merely a decorative figure. She was a living pawn of immense value, a symbol that both England and France sought to control. By the time she approached her early teens, Isabella had developed a quiet self-awareness. She knew that her youth and innocence were both a shield and a weapon. If she played her role wisely, she could influence those around her, subtly shaping their decisions without ever appearing to challenge them. Even before she was old enough to formally enter the political arena, Isabella had begun learning the most important lesson of royal life: that in the great game of power, survival depended not only on bloodlines and titles, but on intelligence, patience, and the ability to move unseen until the right moment to strike. Part 6. The Shadow of a Coup. Isabella's years of relative peace at Westminster Palace were quickly shattered by violent upheavals in English politics. King Richard II, her husband in name, and her highest protector, began to lose the support of the nobility. His autocratic rule, unpopular decisions, and growing distance from his courtiers left him increasingly isolated within his own court. In 1399, while Richard II was away in Ireland to suppress a rebellion, Henry Bolingbroke, the son of the Duke of Lancaster, seized the opportunity to return to England, rally his forces, and take control. In a matter of weeks, Richard II was captured, forced to abdicate, and Henry Bolingbroke crowned himself King Henry IV. With Richard II's downfall, Isabella's position changed completely. No longer the symbol of peace between England and France, she became an extremely valuable pawn in the hands of the new regime. Henry IV understood that holding Isabella meant possessing a political hostage who could be used to bargain with France. At just 10 years old, Isabella was taken to the Tower of London, a fortress that was both a symbol of English power and one of the most infamous prisons in the realm. From a lavish palace filled with banquets and ceremony, she now faced cold stone walls, heavy iron doors, and the constant watch of armed guards. Her contact with her family in France was severed, and she was denied the freedom to move or to interact with the nobles who had once been her allies. In the eyes of the English court, Isabella was no longer a queen in any meaningful sense. She was a bargaining chip, a child prisoner, draped in a royal title. Her fate was no longer her own to decide, but rested entirely in the hands of men playing a ruthless political chess game, where peace or war depended solely on power and advantage. The shadow of the coup had fallen over Isabella's life, and what awaited her beyond her confinement in the Tower of London would prove far harsher than anything she had yet endured. Part 7. The Death of the King. In the winter of 1400, while Isabella remained under strict confinement within the Tower of London, a grim and unsettling message began to ripple through England. King Richard II was dead. The official proclamation from King Henry IV's court stated that the deposed monarch had passed away from natural causes while imprisoned at Pontefract Castle. Yet in the corridors of noble houses, in the whispers of the servants, and in the guarded exchanges between diplomats, a far darker tale persisted: that Richard had been deliberately starved to death over the course of weeks, or perhaps quietly murdered in the night, so that Henry IV could remove the last living symbol of a rival claim to the throne. For Isabella, the news was not simply the loss of a husband in name. It was the destruction of the last thread tying her to a position of dignity in England. She was only 10 years old, far too young to have shared any true marital bond with Richard, yet his presence in the realm had always offered her a form of protection. He was the reason she still bore the title Queen of England, the reason she was housed in royal quarters rather than a common cell. Even from a distance, Richard's existence had been a fragile shield, a reminder that she was not entirely without influence. Now that shield had been shattered forever. The manner of his death only deepened her sense of unease. She had heard the guarded conversations of guards and attendants, catching fragments of rumor that painted Henry IV as a man who would stop at nothing to secure his crown. If a king could be disposed of so quietly, what hope did a powerless child have? The thought chilled her in the long, lonely nights inside the tower, where the echo of footsteps in the corridors carried an unshakable reminder that she was not free. Grief came in waves. Isabella mourned not for a lost love, for there had never been time for such a bond to grow, but for the sudden void where her sense of safety had once been. In a foreign country, stripped of allies and cut off from her family in France, she felt like a small boat adrift on a hostile sea. Every face around her seemed to weigh her worth in political terms, calculating whether she was more valuable as a hostage, a bargaining chip, or perhaps a discarded piece in the game altogether. Henry Ford's court wasted little time redefining her role. The pretense of her being a reigning queen vanished almost overnight. Her royal title was now little more than a polite formality, uttered in public to maintain appearances, but emptied of any real authority. Behind closed doors, she was discussed as an asset, a living lever to pressure the French crown in future negotiations. She was guarded more tightly than ever, her movements restricted, her visitors carefully chosen by the new king's men. Each passing week in the Tower seemed to blur into the next. The once vivid tapestries of her childhood in France felt like memories from another lifetime, replaced by the cold reality of stone walls, iron locks, and the constant awareness that her fate was no longer her own. Richard II's death had not only closed the chapter on his troubled reign, it had transformed Isabella's life in an irreversible way. From a royal bride who had been promised as a symbol of peace to a forsaken young girl stranded in a foreign court, her future entirely at the mercy of men who saw in her only the shadow of power they might wield. And somewhere, deep within the dim corridors of the Tower, Isabella began to understand a truth that would stay with her for the rest of her life. In the ruthless game of kings and crowns, a person's worth could vanish the moment their protector fell. Part 8. Return to France. After years of virtual captivity in England, Isabella was finally allowed to return to her homeland in 1401, at the age of just 11. This was the outcome of tense diplomatic negotiations between King Henry IV's court and the French royal family, a decision born not of mercy, but of shifting political interests. For Henry IV, keeping Isabella no longer offered any significant advantage. For France, welcoming back the king's daughter was a way to reclaim some measure of dignity after years of being treated as the weaker side in a political bargain. Her journey home was a strange and bitter experience. She left England not in the glory of a queen returning to her people, but like a commodity being handed back after losing its value. Upon setting foot on French soil, she was not met with loving arms, but with the cold reality of a family fractured by power and illness. Her father, King Charles VI, remained lost in bouts of madness. At times, he failed to recognize his own daughter. At others, he fell into bizarre delusions, convinced he was made of glass and might shatter at the slightest touch. The French court, as a result, was in a state of disarray, with real power held by regents and noble factions vying for influence. Her mother, Queen Isabeau of Bavaria, had not changed in the slightest. Her ambition still burned fiercely, and Isabella, barely freed from her role as a hostage in England, once again became a pawn in her mother's political game. The queen quickly began plotting her daughter's next marriage, not for Isabella's happiness, but to forge alliances and strengthen the French crown's position amid the political chaos. For Isabella, home was no longer a sanctuary. After years within the walls of Westminster Palace and the Tower of London, she understood that no matter where she was, her fate would always rest in the hands of those more powerful, and that her life had never truly been her own. New schemes awaited her, and what little remained of her childhood was now gone forever. Part 9. A New Marriage. In 1406, at just 14 years old, Isabella entered a new chapter of her life, a marriage completely unlike her previous one. This time, her groom was Charles, Duke of Orleans, a young prince from one of France's most powerful lineages, and the nephew of King Charles VI. Charles was renowned not only for his noble status, but also for his intellect and artistic soul. A lover of poetry and painting, celebrated for his refinement, so unlike the cold, calculating nobles Isabella had known before. Their wedding was not an international bargaining chip like her marriage to Richard II, but rather an internal alliance meant to strengthen the French royal family in a time of unrest. Yet for Isabella, it also offered something she had never truly had before, the hope of a real home. Charles, then only 16, was youthful, open-hearted, and showed Isabella genuine affection. Although their union still bore the mark of political intent, an immediate sense of mutual understanding and empathy blossomed between them. After years of being treated like an object in the game of power, Isabella had finally found a relationship in which she was listened to and loved. They settled in the palace at Orléans, where the air was less stifling than the intrigue-filled Parisian court. Charles encouraged Isabella to continue her learning in literature and the arts, often sharing with her the drafts of poems he composed. In the evenings, they would stroll together in the gardens, speaking of the world beyond their walls and dreaming of a peaceful future, a luxury in a France still haunted by the Hundred Years' War. Before long, Isabella became pregnant. For her, the child was proof of true love and the start of the family she had never known. But fate, once again, refused to grant her lasting happiness. A cruel twist awaited just beyond the threshold, ready to close the brief window in which Isabella had lived not as a political pawn, but as a woman with a life of her own. Part 10. The Legacy of the Forgotten Queen. In the final years of her life, Isabella, no longer known merely as the 6-year-old bride of the King of England, lived as a grown woman, a devoted mother, and a quietly influential figure in the French court. Though still in her teenage years when she entered her second marriage to Charles of Orléans, she quickly adapted to her new role, raising her only son with deep affection and protection. Isabella did not confine herself to the duties of a royal consort. She became a patron of the arts and culture, encouraging her husband and the surrounding nobility to continue nurturing creativity, even as France was torn apart by the Armagnac-Burgundy Civil War and the ongoing Hundred Years' War. She often aided poets, artists, and those left homeless by the conflict, leaving her mark as a rare humanitarian voice in an age of chaos. In the political struggles between noble factions, Isabella chose the path of gentle diplomacy, striving to ease tensions rather than fuel them. Her tact and kindness helped Orléans remain a rare sanctuary of temporary peace, even if only within its limited borders. But in 1412, at just 22 years old, Isabella died suddenly, believed to be from complications after childbirth or illness. Her passing was not only a personal loss for the Orléans family, but also a severe blow to efforts for reconciliation within the French court. Without her moderating voice, the Civil War grew more brutal, and the following years brought a wave of new tragedies upon the nation. Though history rarely remembers Isabella with the grandeur of other famous queens, her life story remains a powerful testament that even when born to be a pawn in the hands of the powerful, one can still live with resilience, dignity, and compassion. Isabella did not overthrow the forces that dictated her fate, but she left behind a spiritual legacy, a reminder that humanity can endure even amidst the fiercest political storms. The life of Isabella Valois was not merely a private tragedy of a young bride, but also a profound lesson in resilience, courage, and dignity amid ruthless political schemes and calculations. From the age of 6, when she was exchanged between two kingdoms, to her formative years in the French court, Isabella maintained her sense of self, even as she navigated the fierce tides of power, unpredictable intrigues, and bloody struggles within the royal household. Her story reminds us that even when fate seems predetermined, a person can still find ways to live with dignity and preserve their humanity. Isabella left her mark on history, not only as a forgotten queen, but also as an inspiration in standing firm, remaining steadfast in the face of adversity, and claiming a measure of agency over one's life, even when the power and interests of others constantly encroach. In history, sometimes the least told stories are the most memorable, for they reveal lives hidden beneath the glitter of power, while embodying timeless human values. Thank you for watching the entire video. To ensure you don't miss the surprising and profound historical stories in upcoming videos, be sure to subscribe to the channel, share the video, and leave your comments below. We look forward to reading your thoughts, impressions, and questions, because you are an essential part of bringing these historical stories to life, making them vivid and meaningful.